All right. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone who has joined 5Things. My name is Joanna Peña-Bickley. I'm the head of research and design for Alexa devices. And today on 5Things, one of the things that I thought that I would bring to the table as a form of inspiration would be the 5 pioneering women who have shaped design. Now, mind you, there are a lot more out there. And I think so much of the work that we will be doing in 2020 in Women in Design at Amazon is actually helping tell the story of all of the pioneering women who have shaped the world of design. So with that, I thought, really start out with kind of the time and season. We're just the week of Thanksgiving, but I think even more important is that so much of design history hasn't always done a really great job in elevating the stories of underrepresented voices in design. Often we don't know their names and their stories, and when we don't know their names and stories, it really actually causes a bit of a chasm because when other underrepresented voices don't get an opportunity to see what others have done, it becomes very hard to imagine what can be. And so in that today, as I look at the world of design, whether we are talking about user experience design, customer experience design, and everything that touches the human life, I think that one of the things that's so important, and I hope that you find, is that that we stand on such broad shoulders. And they are the shoulders of giants, and giants like designer and architect Zaha Hadid. She was born in Baghdad, Iraq, and commenced her college studies at American University in Beirut in the field of mathematics. But one of the things that you find out about Zaha, if you've studied her work, is that everything that she ever did was around new spatial concepts. And this was all about intensifying the existing urban landscape and encompassing all fields of design, from an urban scale to the interiors to the furniture. And the one thing that I have truly loved about studying her work and admire is that she kind of cut through the BS talk that there was a difference between art and design. Because if you look at her work, one of the things that you find is that whether she was studying at the University of Visual Arts in Hamburg or the University of Applied Arts in Vienna, or even some of the guest professorships at Harvard, Yale, and the University of Illinois at Chicago, one of the things that she really began to infuse is that they had a symbiotic relationship. So today, I'm going to share with you some of Zaha's work. Now, one important thing to note, Zaha was taken from us way too early. She was born in 1950. She died in Miami in 2016, very unexpectedly. But in her life, the thing that she became known for is being the queen of curve. And so today, as you take a look at some of her work, this is work that she did in Russia. And what I'm going to do is show you the things that she touched and some of the work that she did right before she passed on. But I think the most important part of it is the legacy that she left and the work that continues in the area of design and sculpture.
The key idea behind our proposal for the Sverdlovsk Philharmonic is that the new building is not just a mere extension of the cluster, but actually the connective tissue that brings all of those buildings together. The main features in this lobby are the volumes of the two auditoria. The ground auditorium and the small auditorium come together to create an inverted topography that signals and signifies the movement of visitors and other guests alike throughout its public spaces. We have designed this space to be a theatrical space, a space where people come to see and to be seen, to enjoy amazing performances in state-of-the-art facilities. The form of the building essentially reflects its contents and its functionality. At the same time, this skin becomes an instrument of structure and integrates within it all the different components of the usability of the building: escalators, staircases, lights, etc.
So there's an example of a 1,600-seat concert hall and 400-seat chamber music hall that are really nestled within the surface and deformations in this suspended canopy. I think one of the things as you research her work and understand where she came from, when we talk about being the queen of curve, in that particular piece, you see this idea of the sound wave floating above ground and the plaza below really serving as a vibrant meeting space for city dwellers. And I think one of the things that she really took into consideration, whether it was the rooftop terrace overlooks that overlook the city's Church All Saints or any of the other spaces, what she attempts to do is fuse those curves into the natural environments of the messy cities that they appear in. The next piece of work that Zaha did, very rarely did she do architectural feats that were for usually on a personal basis or in a residential setting. But before she passed away, she had an opportunity to do something that was really quite remarkable. And so let me play this video clip, because this is one where she was commissioned to create a living space in a new and futuristic way.
I work with many great architects and always dreamed to work with Zaha Hadid, because for me she is an architect of a different league. I met Zaha Hadid a decade ago in London. We discussed architecture, art, and we find mutual interest. She likes Russian avant-garde, and I collect Russian avant-garde. The conversation went very well, and I decided to do a project with Zaha Hadid in Moscow. After our meeting in London, I invited Zaha to Moscow and introduced to Mayor of Moscow and city planner. I have a very nice site and I want to build a residential project. But unfortunately, it was close to park zone and couldn't get permits. I told her I want to continue to work with her and build my private residence outside Moscow. And she told me, describe me the site, and I told her I want to wake up in the morning and I want to just see blue sky. I don't want to see any neighbors and I want to feel free. And she told me, do you realize you have to be above the trees? And I said, yes. And she just take a napkin and draw the sketch. I look and I say, I like it. And this is how we start Capitol Hill project.
Zaha knew Vladislav, very stylish man. She always compared him to the Russian James Bond, who had taste, wealth, to create something extraordinary. Vladislav maybe was the most involved client we've ever had, the most perfectionist, the most invested. But that's to be expected. It's his personal piece. It's his expression.
We both like details. I think we're both perfectionists, so we understand each other very well. I think she admired this project very much herself. It's very interesting to talk to her. She didn't talk too much, but she was very sharp. She always was to the point. She was very sarcastic. She was very intellectual and smart and sharp woman. And it was really tragic what happened. We lost one of the greatest architects from the century.
The Capitol Hill project is a wonderful opportunity. It's a dream house. No architect would refuse such a commission. We created all the challenges ourselves because our idea was to carve into the slope with a series of spaces. We wanted some part of the building at least pull out to the level of the tree canopies, hovering above or at the line where the tree canopies rest, to pull out and have the great view across the forest, while everything else is embedded in the forest.
This is a nightmare, this building to build, I tell you. First, the building have a 4th floor. And the last floor, she's sitting about 30 meters above the ground, only hold by skinny leg. And the construction company said, we cannot build that, we need to have much bigger leg. And Zaha Hadid, no, we cannot do that. You have to find out the solution, but I want to see this leg because otherwise proportion of the building will be completely different. So we spent quite a lot of time with the structure engineer, and finally we managed to deliver what she wanted. And in the end, I'm glad I followed her decision. I'm very happy because I learned myself a lot, and the project became exactly what she designed. I built 75 million square feet, 71 project, and when I saw Zaha Hadid building, I cannot believe it. I managed to build that together with her. It's one of the kind. And I brought some friend like Julian Schnabel. He was completely shocked when he saw the building. He said, I never see anything like that in my life.
This project is an absolute testament to Zaha's genius, to Vladislav's genius, if you like, somebody who develops new levels of enjoying life on this planet. This is a masterpiece. It has Zaha's signature features of organic intricacy, complexity of spatial arrangements, a lot of surprises, but a lot of craftiness and beauty in the final honing of the shape and forms.
We was working together very close for floor plan, the sizes of the room, and the project became not only like a sculpture, it is a beautiful sculpture, but it also livable space.
So that's an example of where the Queen of Curve takes it to that. I think it's really important to understand when she came up. You know, she moved to London in 1972 to study architecture, and she did that at the Architectural Association, and she graduated in 1977. She was actually one of the only women in this program during this time, and I think one of the things that really makes her art and architecture so unique is the precision of which she brings to it. The next piece of work, I think, is actually really interesting because we think with someone who has passed on, what does their legacy end up becoming? Zaha was an amazing business leader who ran her own firm. And to this day, that firm continues doing work. And what they are doing in preserving the legacy, but helping build upon it, is bringing this idea of living buildings and structures to our world. So this next project is actually something that has been completed in Mexico City, but I want to take a moment and realize how much of the data visualization comes into the movement of what brings to life architecture and art fused together. second pioneering woman is Norma Merrick Sklarek. Sklarek was raised by Trinidadian parents in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, but born in Harlem. She became a trailblazer in both New York and California. She was the first female African-American architect and designer licensed in both states. During the Depression, her father was a carpenter, suggested that she look into architecture as a career. And when she did, she doggedly pursued it despite the difficulty of finding employment. It wasn't like in the 60s, or really, if she graduated in 1950 coming out of Columbia University, that you could find a job in a very male-dominated world. As the story goes, she was rejected 19 times before finding her first job. And after a stint at the New York Department of Public Works in the 50s, Sklarek went on to work on a string of high-profile firms, or with and for them, including Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, Green and Associates, where she oversaw massive $50 million renovation of Terminal 1 at Los Angeles International Airport, LAX, and the 1984 Olympics. The next year, she co-founded Siegel, Sklarek and Diamond with Margaret Siegel and Catherine Diamond, and it was the largest woman-owned firm of its kind during that time. Some of the other works that she has done, because she has so many public works to her name, are things like the San Bernardino Hall, the courthouses in Los Angeles, and I'll let you hear how she describes her work in a very, very humble way.
Were you the first Black woman to be elected as a fellow?
Yes,
in the AIA?
it's not. It's an appointment rather than an election.
An appointment.
Yes, that you know, acknowledging the work that I've done, that I've made a very large contribution to architecture.
And were you the first Black woman at
Yes.
that time to be? And this was in 1980?
Yes,
Yes,
1980. I remember that date.
I bet you do. What did the fellowship mean to you? And what is significant about the fellowship?
It means that I have made an extraordinary contribution to architecture. And it's a great honor. And
It's a great honor, but how did you feel besides feeling that it was a great honor?
I said, fellowship is a sexist title, but I'll take it.
Really a remarkable, brilliant woman that we, as we kind of pivot in from art and architecture and the usability of public spaces, now we come in to the clash of culture. Vivienne Westwood, you know, there is sometimes just no words to describe how inspiring she is. Now, I don't necessarily always believe in her philosophies, but I will tell you that she, in watching her and having had the opportunity of meeting her in Cannes, what I realized is that the intersection of public service, communications, and design shared something really important. And it did so and has done so in Vivienne's work. And so in this particular clip, what you're going to describe is Vivienne's history as, frankly, the inventor, cultural icon, and really, you know, as we start to look at what other adjectives could we put in front of her other than pioneering woman of punk.
First, I was looking for backing and support, but I never got it. That's been a strength because I don't have people telling me what to do.
Over the course of 5 decades, the girl-born Vivienne Isabel Swire has gone from punk provocateur to Britain's best-loved fashion designer. Raised in the DIY climate of post-war Derbyshire, it was 1970s London where she opened the King's Road boutique that launched her name. And along with co-conspirator Malcolm McLaren, gave birth to Britain's most defining youth movement, punk. In the years that followed, from Pirates to Mini Crinny, Harris Tweed to the present day, she plundered history, pioneering the idea that fashion could be about more than just clothes. It could be about protest too. Join me as I meet the incendiary Grand Dame behind the name and discover more about a bona fide ID icon, Vivienne Westwood. In the late 1950s, at that time when youth culture was really coming into the fore, how aware were you of that?
Well, when I was 13, 14, you had this Rock Around the Clock with Bill Haley and all these teddy boys. There were some in my village. We were, there's a Ted. They looked great. And, you know, they were overturning buses and ripping seats out, and we wanted some of it.
Were these when the first seeds for Let It Rock were beginning to be sowed, those ideas of
No, it was all about, you know, getting a pencil skirt and all this stuff, these tight things, little velvet bopping shoes, high heels. It's the most incredible time because it coincided completely with me being a kid turning into a woman. You know, that's how you were seeing yourself. You were the most desired things on the planet at age 14 and 15. And there we were with, you know, making clothes. I started even then. And we were where it was at. And so the first time around, that was rock and roll. I was there. And then when I met Malcolm later on, he was 4 years younger than me. So at a certain point, he wanted to rework the 50s. So I was, you know, I knew what to do.
In October 71, Vivienne and her art student boyfriend, Malcolm McLaren, took over the retail space at 430 Kings Road, and she began deconstructing the clothing of her teenage years into the look that would launch 1,000 safety pins.
Adding straps and bondage and stuff, that was a sort of customising. Well, that was customising. We were just experimenting.
I suppose there were those ideas of that kind of situationist thinking, that idea that art and protest could be on the streets and through your clothing.
The situationists, when you really heard about them most, was around 1968. Of course, it had been around in the 50s, Bohemians and this kind of idea. And it really was that stupid lyrics of "We don't want no education." Pink Floyd, yeah. I mean, I like the tune, but and the way they sang it and deal with it. That's really, I mean, it's really good, but the lyrics are really awful.
If you don't eat your meat, you can't have any pudding.
Punk started in your boutique and then worked its way outwards. It was the fashion came before the music.
Yeah, well, yes, I think that's, well, I know that that's true. It's true, yeah. And it all coincided with, you know, Johnny Rotten, and they really believed in it all at that time. I had a big respect for Johnny Rotten then. I stopped caring about punk because I didn't think people were thinking. Instead of keep banging your head against the establishment, you have to go faster. You can't just, you know, keep on, you know, kicking and spitting and saying, you know, good. It looked great, and it still does look great. And I know that my son Joe is really got quite a nostalgia for it. It really meant something to him. And he thinks that it did mean a lot to people, and it actually changed their lives. You know, they thought, yeah, I can start a magazine like Terry Jones, you know, or, you know, they really did. I can do something.
For Vivienne, that doing something meant throwing herself into the world of high fashion, making her catwalk debut with the Third World-inspired Pirate collection in 1981.
When the Sex Pistols finished, and it was still Seditionaries, I didn't know whether to close the shop because the lease had stopped and Malcolm was doing music, and I just thought I didn't want to do it. And you know what? I decided to carry on for the reason that I was good at it, and I thought it was my duty to carry on and keep on doing it. It was World's End still, and I said to him, well, you're right, Malcolm, either I've got to help you in the music business because the Sex Pistols have just gone, or we work together in the fashion business. We can't do both. Fashion every time, he said. He said, you've got to be the front of this fashion business. And he said, what you need to do is you need to do a catwalk show, and it should be under your own name. It should be under Vivienne Westwood. So I did. I thought, I'll do what other designers do. I started looking at history, French Revolution, you know, all those merveilleuses and these incroyables from the French Revolution. So it was the idea of let's plunder the world. That's how the clothes became the pirate idea, that we would get our ideas from history and from the third world. Yeah. And of course we put that merveilleuse dress in the first pirate show.
Throughout the decade, Vivienne's early notoriety quickly gave way to both critical and commercial success, and her collections, be it Hypnos or Clint Eastwood, Mini Crinny or Harris Tweed, became imitated the world over.
Did you know when things were going to be successful?
I think you have to have that sixth sense of what's going to sell. You know, when you do that little corset and it just gives this décolleté that nobody's seen since 1800. You know, I mean, you just know you're onto something. You know, Sadie Frost, she was the first person to wear that on the catwalk, and the photographers just died. Come back, baby. Their eyes were crossed. They were just couldn't believe it. Yeah. Mm.
Today, Vivienne Westwood occupies a singular space in British fashion, both much loved, yet still provocatively outspoken.
For your Autumn/Winter 16 show, you had an idea, and it was culture, not consumption. Mm-hmm. What did you mean by that?
The 20th century was a mistake. It preached the idea of smashing the past. We call it iconoclasm. It's like telling a scientist to throw away his laboratory. You throw away all your technique, you throw away all the skills, you throw away all the people in the past who've been geniuses. You don't want to know about them because everything comes from you. We don't have any artists today. You know, they don't have any vision whatsoever, and that's why they're not artists. They're just in it for the money, kind of, and talking about themselves. If they do reflect the times, then it just shows how awful it is, and it's about ugliness if they are trying to do anything. But the idea that everybody can be an artist is just mad. The only people who have any culture are the ones who don't throw away the past.
With husband Andreas Kronteller taking a more prominent role in the design of the brand, Vivienne spent an increasing amount of time championing the political issues that have come to define her work.
We've got to build a movement. It's called Intellectuals Unite. I started this with the idea that we've got to link all the NGOs, link everybody who doesn't agree with the government. It's the only way we'll save ourselves. The great thing about intellectuals, though, is that it is inclusive. And that means that I just say anybody who's on a march who wants to know what's going on in the world and their place in it is an intellectual. Even if it's a kid who's just joined the march, he's had no education, he's been playing truant, and he's only 14 years old or something, or 12 or whatever, he's on that march, he's an intellectual. And I would say that David Cameron is not an intellectual. Propaganda is very, very powerful, and even today, you know, you get loads of people saying that David Cameron's the best to run the country financially. My God, if you want to dig a hole and put your money in it, vote for David Cameron. You know, I mean, it's mad.
I'd love to ask how you feel about that word icon and how you feel about being described as one.
Well, I'm not interested. I mean, 10 years after I'm dead, nobody will even remember you. It doesn't matter, you know, I don't care. You know, hopefully, you never know, this business might still be going, but, well, it will be with Andreas. He'll remember me and make sure that it's Vivienne and Andreas somehow working together. But no, I just want to save the world and get a life, you know. I mean, and that is one of my slogans, which is to do with literally, let's let the next generation get a life.
Well, Vivienne, I think people will remember you regardless. But thank you very much.
We move from Vivienne Westwood to Marianne Brandt. Marianne, born October 1st, 1893, was a German painter, sculptor, photographer, and designer who studied at the Bauhaus Art School in Weimar and later became the head of the Bauhaus metal workshop in 1927. Today, Brandt's designs for household objects such as lamps, ashtrays, teapots are considered some of the timeless classics of the modernist industrial design movement. She created everything from photo montages to metalwork and studied and worked in the Bauhaus in the 20s. Some of my favorite work that she ever did was here with taking a look at her modernist metalworks in the teapot or even the liquor stirrer. And one of the things that has really made her work remarkable is that it has stood the test of time. When I speak to other designers, particularly in the industrial design space, she is the name that gets evoked, or her work is what gets evoked as partially art, but some of the most useful objects that you could bring into a home. So as we think about things in our world of connected home and creating magic and remembering that when we create connected devices, that the design of this has to be just as smart and artful and look to the grander purpose that it might serve. I think Marianne Brandt does a remarkable job of that. The one thing that I highly recommend for those of you that get a chance to travel to both Los Angeles, Vienna, you can see her work, but some of her most recognizable work sits in MoMA today. And it is something that is just, you can take a look at the love and the craft and the detail that went into every single piece. Moving from Marianne Brandt to Tomoko Miho, who was born in Los Angeles in 1931. She spent her early days in the Gila River War Relocation Center. Well, that, if you just think about that, it was called a relocation center, but in fact was an internment camp. When she got out, she attended the Minneapolis School of Art and Art Center School in Los Angeles, where she earned her degree in industrial design. She and her husband, who is also a fellow designer, James Miho, went traveling through Europe and met a number of designers like Herbert Lepine and visited the renowned Ulm School of Design. One of the things that she talks about is how impactful those trips were and really fueled her position at one of the largest design companies in the world, which is Herman Miller. As you can see, that is Tomoko Miho sitting at the edge of the corner in a very Mad Men feeling-esque design firm that for the 60s was really reinventing the workspace. Miho is noted for her contributions to the form of architectural posters in New York and Chicago, but today they sit in MoMA, at the Library of Congress, and at Cooper Hewitt. And the other part that she has done is published a number of different design magazines, and her work is so strongly influenced by Swiss international typographic styles and architecturally infused works that really honor the minimalist approach to international design. This is an example of some of the work that she did in terms of the design work and really putting forth the fitting, how do you create modular workspaces or public spaces. This is a fantastic piece. If you just Google her name and take a look at the Herman Miller website, they've done a wonderful job of memorializing some of that work. But the work that has always inspired me was that one of the things to know about Miho was that, this was a woman who came up in 1931. Her design was always thought of as the design world's best kept secret. It was a distinctive presence anywhere that it is. But I think one of the things that she relished was her privacy. She often avoided the spotlight and just let the art and her design speak for itself. The thing that is so special about her work was that it was truly endowed, as you take a look at it, with crystalline clarity. And it really has a luster all its own. She never attempted to make a name for herself, but she has acquired one of the most formidable reputations among her peers as the minimalist and a modernist in the best sense of the term, and probably one of the most perspective problem solvers that had come of our time. She really did bring problem solving to design and was the master of the dramatic understatement. This particular piece is something that sits in MoMA, and I'll let her tell you about it.
The Museum of Modern Art is one of the reasons why I moved to New York. It has the finest collections of art and design, which continue to, I guess, affect and influence my heart and my mind when I create my own designs. I was 19 years of age when I first came here, and the following year I started classes at the Art Center School, which is now the Art Center College of Design in California. When the museum reopened in November 2004, I was surprised to see the 1967 Great Architecture in Chicago poster. It was a poster that I had designed when I was with the Center for Advanced Research in Design, which was a subsidiary of Container Corporation. The subjects were generally of certain sites in Chicago: the Adler Planetarium, the library, the Field Museum, and I was interested in getting the feel of Chicago with the great architecture that was surrounding us. But I am very honored to see that the poster here is displayed with some good friends, Milton Glazer's Dylan on the left, and the Mueller Brockman poster, Less Noise, which is on the right. Well, architecture is great in Chicago, with buildings by Louis Sullivan, Frank Lloyd Wright, Mies van der Rohe, and others. And I was really interested in capturing the essence of the spirit that architecture can express. And also, I should mention that my brother Miho was an architect, and I think he was really my first mentor. At the time, silver mylar was an interesting material to use, so I scribed a grid on the mylar and reflected different objects. And I was looking at the portfolio of Rodney Galarno, who brought by his photography portfolio and reflected one of his rather conventional images, and it seemed to work very well, so then we decided to photograph it. Subsequently, the poster design evolved, and it was first printed as a duotone in black and gray. Later, we decided that it was much more interesting to convert the photo image into line and have a silkscreen on foil. I am grateful to MoMA. They have other poster designs that I have created. They include the Omniplan poster in 4 different colors and the Great Ideas of Western Man exhibition poster.
And that is Tomoko Miho. So 5 extraordinary women in design. One of the things that I will tell you is that in every single practice, the thing that I admire the most about them was the human sensibility that they brought to their work, the vulnerability, the boldness of bringing an idea to life, and the strength in which to operate in a space where no one else looked like them, sounded like them, or came from the places that they came from. And with that, I'll open the call to Q&A time.
I wanted to say that it was very, very interesting. I really enjoyed all of it. And I think that you mentioned that in the end, and I think that was one of the most interesting things, is, for example, in Zaha Hadid, how she brought, I think, a little bit of feminine to her architecture, because you see that the shapes that she's usually using are round, and I think there is something which is very feminine in that. And also looking at several works from different kind of designer, architecture, industrial design, graphic design. So bringing I think the feminine and the human touch, for me, that was very, very interesting in the way you presented it to us.
I would agree. I'd agree with you. I think Zaha does this remarkable job. You know, I think so much of the 20th century's work was dominated. And this, I think, comes out of, I think some of the writings of Jane Jacobs and others who have critiqued the architecture of early 20th century. But I think one of the things, it was definitely male dominated. So to see women arrive on it and begin to create human form and for humans, and think about usability of spaces and accessibility of spaces was really remarkable. Whereas most of the Western architecture is derivative of Le Corbusier, right? Futurist, architect, designer. But, if you go to or look at any of the video clips from the World's Fair, or any of the work that he did, or then the work that ends up in every major metro in the United States, what you realize was that what he was doing was building for the car, not the person. Like you saw this, industrialization for building for machines rather than humans. And I think what Zaha did was bring a feminine mystique to it, but also flipped the idea of these open spaces into understanding that it was communal art. That could be at a city level. A couple of things that I would say and just recommend to the audience is some of the work that she did. And this was right before her death, that was unveiled in China. If I remember correctly, is the airport right outside of Beijing. When you see when you see the usability of that space, what I love about her work, it is both technically correct, almost like the geometry of math you see present, but there is an elegance of movement to it. It's almost like dancing buildings is the way that I look at her work, because they feel that they have a natural move. I'm sorry, I ended up cutting someone off. What was the comment?
I can add to that round shapes consider it to be more feminine, and coming from an industrial design background, I can also say that when women design, not just the rounded shapes, but for example, when women design for women, that the material types would be softer. While as men design are using industrial design, it would be like metal, silver, while women might use more soft materials like leather, soft textures and so on. So in Zaha Hadid architecture, you can definitely see that in her shapes.
Anyone else?
I would say it's interesting that to look at from a kind of a feminist perspective. And I think, by the way, thank you for presenting those 5 transformation women. It's really great. But my point of view is, I think it's probably not only like from a feminist standpoint, but it's also a rebellion. Like the architecture traditionally has been like for Zaha, she created this new form that's not the traditional way of how people see architecture. And I feel like that stands out as a way to kind of break the convention and introduce a new type of artistic. And also for Marianne and Brandt and her people with LSC, it's also like very kind of breaking the way for how functioning teapots and the daily objects are, but like try to bring the artistic form to it. So I think I feel like it happens that they are all women, but it's also a way that they kind of create a new paradigm to shift how the design trends move forward. And I think my other thought is I feel those designers are like their work can pass along because like of the format they're doing, like the architecture, like the Flushing Airport is admired by many people and used by tons of people every day, and it will still stand on for the past hundreds of years. And also the people that Merrick created that also lasts long. And I was thinking like for design disciplines like user experience or interaction design, like what are the areas that we can kind of break the norm, or what are the kind of design inspirations we can bring to the technology that will like hopefully also stands for a longer time in the fast changing tech world. So like I think that's something that kind of intrigues me. And
I love that thought. I love that thought, the longevity of, because so much of what we do sometimes feels intangible, right? That there's a psychology to it. And I think that as we think about IoT and connected devices, whether you're looking at them in a commercial setting, in a factory, in a building, in a public commercial space, or even in your home, in a private residence, what is, we always talk about the life cycle of a device, but what is, if we started to talk about it in the life cycle of the design and the modern problem that it solves? Any thoughts?
I was going to jump in and just say something really occurred to me hearing Nikki talk a little bit about this is that so much of the folks that you are presenting on, there's a degree of cross-cultural aspect to their work. I mean, we're looking at women who are designing often from one culture, and pairing that and sort of subverting the sort of common lines. I think you mentioned, there's this Western notion, this Eastern notion, and how much all these folks are crossing across those boundaries very, which is not sort of commonly done. That to me is just like a really interesting theme that I picked up on. I don't know if you were intending that intentionally, but it really, hits home when you're talking about, okay, these people are bringing a vision of a different culture into another one and creating that fusion that cuts across. And to your question, Joanna, responding directly, I feel like there is a lot of work that is being done now, thinking about sort of whole life cycle architecture, buildings and how they will, live and evolve and change. One of my most favorite books is, I think it's Stuart Brandt, How Buildings Learn. And he really talks about, simpler buildings often evolve and have a life cycle unto themselves. It's a really phenomenal look at sort of how people can build things today that are actually built to keep going and built to keep changing. So I would highly recommend that book if you're interested in that kind of thinking about the ecosystem of architecture and the life cycle of buildings. It's a phenomenal read.
I think it sounds great. I'm actually putting it on my queue as we speak on my Kindle, because I think one of the things that, as we look at, you know, a world where everything will connect to everyone, I think is some of the theme that I felt drawing towards it, were these were pioneering women who used human-centered design, no matter what kind of design they were doing, whether, you know, you look at Zaha or Marianne or Merrick, everything had a juxtaposition, wasn't for art's sake, but for human consumption in some way, shape, or form. And that, I think, even true of the statement of angst that Vivienne Westwood talked about, and I will share once that link out, because I think as you start to take a look at that, it becomes this idea that as humans, you know, when we talk about the health of our planet, the reality is the planet doesn't need us. So how do we become more sustainable and create inventions that have that staying power, but yet pay off the entropy bill that we have that's come due on Spaceship Earth? Here, I leave you guys with a couple of thoughts. One of which is, you know, the thing that I loved about every single one of these designers is they took a risk, that they understood history, but yet they brought it into ideas that would solve problems for now and into the future. And as designers, I think one of the things that we can bring home to our customers is that we all do come from incredibly diverse places. And a part of being a designer at Amazon is very much, we talk about living the principles, but living them in a way that isn't that isn't necessarily caustic to what we are attempting to solve for. And so with that, I leave you with a thought around what it means to dare to design the future today in a week where we are really thought about that, you know, we should be sharing the gratitude that each one of these women in design, architecture, in fashion, and in technology, as each one of them had or played in a space of different kinds of technologies for its time, brought together both new thinking and subverted systems, or got into a system in order to change it. And with that, I wish each and every one of you a very happy Thanksgiving week. Thanks.